There is a strange pattern hidden inside modern life. People reach goals they once believed would change everything. They graduate, they receive the promotion, they buy the house, they move to a new city. They finally arrive where they once hoped to be. For a brief moment, it feels significant. Then something almost invisible happens. The achievement quietly becomes normal. Attention shifts. A new expectation appears. A new destination begins forming before the previous one has fully settled. Without noticing, many people stop asking whether they have arrived. Instead, they begin asking what comes next. Over time, arrival itself starts feeling temporary. Not because achievements became meaningless, but because they no longer remain endings for very long. Perhaps this raises a different question. Not why people struggle to feel satisfied, but what kind of environment quietly transforms every arrival into another departure. That is the system we are about to investigate. Every place built for arrival quietly prepares people to leave again. Airports guide passengers toward transfers before they have absorbed the fact that they have landed. Railway stations direct each arrival toward another platform. Hotel lobbies are designed around check-ins and check-outs rather than permanence. Escalators never pause beneath your feet. Corridors continue beyond every doorway. Architecture itself seems to whisper that arrival is only another stage of movement. Without announcing it, the environment treats every destination as the beginning of the next journey, making transition feel more natural than staying still. Before we continue, it's worth understanding where this conversation fits. You're watching Darkside Protocol. Here, we begin one layer deeper. We investigate the systems and conditions that quietly make human experiences increasingly inevitable. This is one layer of Protocol Multiverse, a larger investigation explored from 3 different perspectives. Punchline Protocol begins with the human experience itself. Darkside Protocol investigates the systems behind that experience. Debrief Protocol steps back to connect both perspectives into one wider picture. Every film explores the same reality, from a different layer. If you'd like to explore the investigation from every perspective, you'll find all 3 paths waiting in the description. Now, let's continue. Completion has never been merely the end of an activity. For most of human history, it performed a far more important function. It created stability. A harvest was completed before winter arrived. A bridge was finished before people depended on it. A house became a place to live only after construction had ended. Completion allowed effort to become structure, and structure gave people something they could build upon. The value of finishing was never simply that the work stopped. Its value was that life could continue from something that no longer demanded constant attention. Completion created continuity. It transformed movement into foundation. Without moments that genuinely came to an end, every new beginning would have rested on unfinished ground. Many of the places people trust most share one quiet characteristic. A completed bridge no longer asks to be rebuilt each morning. A centuries-old stone staircase still carries footsteps without questioning its purpose. Ancient city walls remain standing long after those who built them disappeared. Mature trees no longer struggle to become trees. They simply continue growing from foundations established long ago. The physical world quietly reminds us that stability has always depended on things remaining complete long enough for something else to grow from them. Lasting structures rarely survive because they never changed. They survive because they were allowed to become complete before change began again. The systems surrounding modern life increasingly operate according to a different logic than those that shaped most of human history. They are no longer designed around long periods of stability followed by occasional change. Instead, change itself has become part of their normal operating condition. Software is expected to update continuously. Markets reorganize without waiting for equilibrium. Information is replaced before it has fully settled. Professional skills require constant revision. Products evolve through endless iterations instead of reaching final versions. In systems like these, completion becomes increasingly difficult to preserve because the environment itself rarely pauses long enough for anything to remain finished. Stability is no longer the condition between changes. It gradually becomes the exception inside continuous movement. Some environments reveal this principle without saying a single word. Digital departure boards change while people are still reading them. Airport gates quietly replace one destination with another before the previous passengers have disappeared. Construction cranes leave one skyline only to appear on the next. Roads are resurfaced while traffic continues moving around them. Store windows change with every season, long before the last display has become familiar. Nothing appears broken. Everything functions exactly as intended. Yet almost every structure quietly behaves as though remaining unchanged for too long would itself become a form of failure. The environment no longer waits for completion. It prepares for the next adjustment before the previous one has fully become part of the world. Completion has not disappeared from modern life. Projects still end. Products are still released. Degrees are still awarded. Buildings are still finished. But completion no longer remains what it once was. It survives only briefly before becoming the expected starting point of something else. Yesterday's achievement quickly becomes today's baseline. Today's baseline quietly becomes tomorrow's minimum expectation. Without announcing the transition, completion loses its ability to remain a destination. It continues to exist, but only as a temporary condition inside a much longer cycle of continuous development. The result is subtle. People still cross finish lines, yet those finish lines no longer remain places where life can pause. They function more like intersections, directing movement toward the next objective almost as soon as the previous one has been reached. Many modern environments reveal this pattern through their own architecture. A newly opened terminal immediately begins planning its expansion. Freshly completed office buildings advertise the next phase before the first tenants have fully settled inside. University graduation ceremonies quietly become recruitment events for the following stage of education or employment. Product launches are accompanied by early discussions of future versions. Even newly opened neighborhoods display signs announcing what will soon be built beside them. Completion is still visible everywhere, yet almost nowhere is it treated as a lasting state. The surrounding environment behaves as though every finished point already belongs to the beginning of another process, making permanence feel increasingly unfamiliar without ever declaring that anything has gone wrong. If completion no longer remains stable, something else quietly begins taking its place. Objectives stop behaving like destinations and begin behaving like mechanisms. Their purpose is no longer simply to be reached. Their purpose is to generate the conditions for the next objective. A completed project produces new responsibilities. A successful career opens expectations that did not exist before. A finished qualification reveals another level of specialization. Every conclusion quietly expands the horizon beyond it. From inside the system, this appears perfectly logical. Growth creates new possibilities. New possibilities create new objectives. The cycle continues without interruption. Over time, movement itself becomes easier to preserve than completion, not because anyone consciously chooses endless striving, but because the surrounding environment continually transforms every ending into the beginning of another process. Some places seem designed to demonstrate this principle without words. Airport terminals guide arriving passengers toward connecting flights before they have fully experienced the fact that they arrived. Highway signs rarely celebrate the city behind you. They immediately point toward the next destination ahead. Construction fences surrounding a finished building already display images of the next development. Corporate campuses quietly expand, while existing offices are still being occupied. Even museum exhibitions often end by directing visitors toward the next gallery, rather than back toward the entrance. The architecture does not resist completion. It simply refuses to let completion become the final state. Every path gently curves toward another path, making continuation feel more natural than conclusion. For most of human history, completed milestones became part of a person's stable reality. They remained visible long enough to reshape everyday life. A finished home stayed home. A profession remained a profession. A community often lasted for generations. Completion accumulated. Each finished chapter became a permanent part of the chapters that followed. Modern systems behave differently. Completion still occurs, but it is quickly absorbed into a new baseline before it has time to change how life feels. Yesterday's success becomes today's expectation. Today's expectation quietly becomes tomorrow's requirement. As a result, people do not necessarily achieve less than previous generations. They simply spend less time living inside what they have already achieved. Arrival loses the opportunity to settle into memory before movement begins again. Gradually, life starts feeling less like a series of completed chapters and more like a continuous sequence of transitions that rarely pause long enough to become part of who we believe we are. Some landscapes quietly preserve the memory of completion. Ancient villages still carry streets laid centuries ago. Stone bridges continue serving rivers long after the people who built them disappeared. Old libraries contain books that have remained on the same shelves for generations. These places reveal what accumulated completion looks like. By contrast, modern environments constantly replace their own recent past. Storefronts change before they become familiar. Offices are redesigned before routines have settled. Public spaces are renovated before weather has left visible marks upon them. The physical world itself begins forgetting yesterday almost as quickly as tomorrow arrives. Without saying so directly, the environment teaches that permanence is no longer something to expect, but something briefly experienced before the next transition quietly begins. Perhaps the most important change is not the number of objectives surrounding modern life, but the kind of system those objectives belong to. Closed systems eventually complete their cycles. They stabilize, consolidate, and create periods during which what has been built can simply exist. Open systems behave differently. They continuously exchange information, demands, and opportunities with their environment. New inputs arrive before previous cycles have fully settled. Fresh possibilities appear before earlier achievements have become part of everyday life. The system remains alive precisely because movement never completely stops. From this perspective, the experience of never fully arriving is not necessarily a personal failure or even an unintended consequence. It is a predictable condition of living inside an environment whose normal state is continuous adaptation rather than prolonged stability. Certain places reveal this principle almost invisibly. A modern airport never truly sleeps. Flights arrive while others depart. Cleaning begins before passengers have completely left the gate. Supply vehicles move while new travelers continue entering the terminal. Digital information changes around the clock without waiting for a natural pause. Large distribution centers, financial exchanges, and communication networks behave in similar ways. Their purpose is not to reach a finished state, but to sustain uninterrupted flow. Nothing appears incomplete, yet nothing is ever finally complete. The environment quietly demonstrates that permanence is no longer required for a system to function. Continuous operation has become its own form of stability. When completion no longer remains stable, continuity becomes harder to preserve. When continuity weakens, arrival becomes increasingly difficult to experience as a lasting reality. None of this requires people to become less disciplined, less grateful, or less ambitious. The structure itself has changed. Modern systems continue generating movement because movement has become one of the ways they remain alive. Every completed cycle naturally gives rise to another. Every achieved objective quietly becomes part of a larger sequence that has no obvious final destination. From inside such an environment, the feeling of never fully arriving is no longer surprising. It is the expected result of living within a system where completion is temporary, continuity is continually interrupted, and new beginnings emerge faster than endings can become part of ordinary life. The question then is no longer whether you have done enough to deserve the feeling of arrival. The more important question is whether the environment still allows arrival to remain long enough to be experienced as a genuine place, rather than another point of departure. Stand for a moment in the center of a large transportation hub and simply watch. Trains arrive while others are already leaving. Departure boards change before platforms become quiet. Escalators continue carrying people in every direction without ever appearing to rest. Cleaning crews prepare spaces for the next wave before the previous one has completely disappeared. Nothing seems rushed, nothing seems broken. Yet every part of the environment quietly assumes that movement will continue. The system does not prevent arrival. It simply treats arrival as a brief event inside an uninterrupted flow. Perhaps that is why so many people reach places they once dreamed about, yet find themselves looking toward the next destination almost before they have realized they finally arrived. Perhaps the most important discovery is not that modern life asks us to keep moving. Human beings have always moved forward. Every generation has pursued new possibilities beyond the ones before it. What has quietly changed is the place that arrival occupies within the journey itself. Completion still exists, achievement still matters, destinations are still reached, but they no longer remain destinations for very long. The surrounding environment continuously transforms them into the starting point of another cycle before they have fully become part of lived experience. Perhaps this is why so many people reach places they once believed would finally feel different, only to find themselves already looking toward what comes next. Not because they lack gratitude, not because they have forgotten how to appreciate what they achieved, but because they are living inside a system whose normal condition is continuous continuation rather than lasting completion. Understanding this does not restore permanent arrival. It does something quieter. It reminds us that the feeling of never quite arriving may not begin with personal inadequacy. Perhaps the first step toward understanding arrival is understanding the kind of world through which we are moving. Watch a transportation hub after the crowds have gone. The escalators continue moving. Information screens continue updating. Cleaning machines continue their routes. Lights remain on for passengers who have not yet arrived. Even in moments that appear quiet, the environment is already preparing for movement that has not yet begun. The system does not wait for the next journey to start before reorganizing itself around it. It simply continues. Perhaps that is the deepest characteristic of the world we now inhabit. Arrival has not disappeared. It has become one brief moment inside a process that no longer expects itself to end. If this investigation helped you see the system more clearly, there is another perspective waiting for you. PUNCHLINE Protocol explores how these same systems are experienced from the inside. Debrief Protocol brings both perspectives together and reveals what changes once the human experience and the system are understood as parts of the same reality. If you want to continue the investigation, you'll find both channels linked in the description below. This is Protocol Multiverse. One reality, three perspectives. The ideas are human. The narration is digital. The interpretation is yours.